President George Washington by Bruce Sims. Major events while he was president. He was elected to his first term under a unanimous vote in 1789. The first United States Census was in 1790. Established District of Columbia in 1791. Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. Proclamation of Neutrality in 1793. Whiskey Rebellion in 1794. Jay's Treaty in 1795. And Pinocchio's Treaty in 1796, and also Farewell Address was in 1796. His foreign policy, the Farewell Address. The Farewell Address, one of George Washington's biggest contributions to United States foreign policy. This address was given in 1796. In Washington's address, he warned against two things. The first was he warned against the destructive nature of the party's politics. The second was he warned against the danger of foreign alliances. He gave warning to not favor one country over another and also not to become allies with others in a foreign war. His warnings were listened to but barely followed. The United States did not keep itself away from foreign alliances and issues. However, it did remain neutral. Possible implications to his foreign policy. If the U.S. had heeded his warnings and did not make foreign allies, we would possibly not have been able to trade materials, culture, etc. We would not have had as good of foreign relationships as we do now.
President Harry Truman was the 33rd President of the United States. Here are some key events in his term. April 12, 1945. President Franklin D. Roosevelt dies in Warm Springs, Georgia. Harry S. Truman becomes the 33rd President of the United States. September 2nd. Japan surrenders, ending World War II in Asia. State Department official George Kennan, serving in the Soviet Union, sends his long telegram, which he analyzes the sources of Soviet conduct and Moscow's geopolitical intentions and suggests American response. Truman signs the Truman Doctrine. Appropriation approved by Congress for Greece and Turkey. Congress passed the European Recovery Program, the Marshall Plan. April 4th, 1949. 12 nations from Europe and North America signed the North Atlantic Treaty. June 30, 1950. Truman announces that he has ordered American ground forces stationed in Japan to Korea. General Douglas MacArthur commands the U.S. and United Nations troops. All of these key events are important to understand why and how the Truman Doctrine was used, and how important it actually was in the containment of the Communist Empire. Basically, the Truman Doctrine was put in place to give $400 million in financial aid to the countries of Greece and Turkey from the communist governments. It was enacted on March 12, 1947. But when NATO was formed, Greece and Turkey joined NATO, which guaranteed protection of the two countries, thus no longer needing the Truman Doctrine. But the Truman Doctrine didn't die. It took the role of giving military and economic aid to other nations that were even remotely in danger of communism. This tactic was called containment. It was the battle plan, so to speak, of combating communism, and the Truman Doctrine was its main weapon. For example, South Korea in the 1950s, Vietnam in the 1960s and 70s, and even to Afghanistan in the late 70s. This just shows how effective the foreign policy actually was, even though it's not for its intended purpose. Today we see the obvious effects of this policy. For instance, South Korea is a major manufacturer and economic partner. What if South Korea didn't exist and it was all communist like North Korea? Or, on the negative side of things, what if we never gave Afghan rebels the weapons to defeat the Soviets? Would the war in Afghanistan be a little different today? These are just two of the many effects of the Truman Doctrine in our lives.
George W. Bush and the regime change of Iraq. Operation Iraqi Freedom accomplished a long-standing U.S. objective, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, but replacing his regime with a stable, moderate, democratic political structure has run into significant difficulty. That outcome would contribute to preventing Iraq from becoming a sanctuary for terrorists, a key recommendation of the September 11th Commission report. During the 1990s, U.S. efforts to change the regime covertly failed because of limited U.S. commitment, the organization of the Iraqi opposition, and the vigilance of Iraq's several overlapping security services. Previous U.S. administrations had ruled out a U.S. military invasion to change the regime, believing such action would be risky and that Iraq did not necessarily pose a level of threat that would justify doing so. President George W. Bush characterized Iraq as a grave potential threat to the United States because of its refusal to abandon its weapons of mass destruction programs and its potential to transfer WMD to terrorist groups. After November 2002 through March 2003 round of UN WMD inspections in which Iraq's cooperation was mixed, on March 19, 2003, the United States launched Operation Iraqi Freedom to disarm Iraq and change its regime. The regime fell on April 9, 2003. An interim government was named on June 1, 2004, and the handover took place on June 28, 2004. The Bush administration asserts that U.S. policy in Iraq will ultimately succeed as U.S. trainers in the interim Iraqi government build new Iraqi security bodies. Some believe that the United States should add troops to the current level, about 140,000 plus about 24,000 foreign military personnel, and should eliminate pockets of insurgent control. Others believe the United States needs to take new steps to recruit major international force contributors, and yet some others believe that the United States should pull out of Iraq. This affects by keeping troops overseas to train Iraqi personnel.